It appears my return is not welcome. You've obviously all made your mind up about me. I cannot blame you for that, man. So, well, boys, who's gonna do it then? Who's gonna kill me? And I don't mind. Go ahead. Please. Put me out of my misery. And do it. Do it. Do it, do it. Do it!
They say you can't win your fantasy team in the first round. However, you can lose it in the first round. In 2017, Joe selected David Johnson with his number one pick. Of course, that year, David Johnson only played one game. He probably got hurt during the first half of the game. I'm not sure if that's true, but considering Joe, that makes it hilarious. In 2018, Hensel made the worst selection of all when he picked Le'Veon Bell, who was in a much publicized contract dispute with the Steelers. He played no games. In 2019, Eric selected Saquon Barkley. He played 13 games, got 6 touchdowns, 5 less than he did in 2018, and got just a hair over 1,000 yards. This was a decent first round pick, but not what you would expect out of someone that you select first. But we'll get to that in a second. Joe comes back again. I wonder why he got the first pick again. With Saquon Barkley. This was the tragic year where Saquon only played 2 games. 2021, Ed selects Christian McCaffrey, who in the 2020 season, drafted by Tim Bundy, only played 3 games. So Ed drafts him in 2021, and he plays 7. Now, my think of selecting Jonathan Taylor went a little like this. If I can outdo what Saquon Barkley did in 2019, which again was 13 games, 6 touchdowns, and 1,000 yards, if Jonathan Taylor can top that, then within this league, I will have had the best number 1 pick over the past 5 to 6 years. Does that give me more of a shot for victory? Yes, it does. Because it changes the trajectory of my team, because my running back didn't just play 2, 7, 0, or 1 game. He was healthy and he played more than 13 games. That's already a win in my book. Now, as I said, Saquon Barkley in 2019 wasn't the number 1 running back. That doesn't necessarily make that a failure of a pick. You aren't picking or at least my think of it is, I'm not picking somebody who I am predicting to be the number 1 running back. I'm picking someone who gives me the best chance at winning the number 1 slot. So, to be honest with you, I never really had Christian McCaffrey in my head. And by the way, I mean, if you ask me, there is no way that you should, with having a number 1 pick, you should ever consider picking up a wide receiver, at least in the league that we play in today. In 2016, Eric had the very first pick and he selected, what the fuck is this guy's name? The other Steeler, Antonio Brown. That ended up being a decent pick as well because Antonio Brown had a 1,000-yard-plus season. He played enough games. But in this league, in order to have a fighting chance, if you're coming off of being the worst team in the league, you should pick up a running back and add some stability to your team. I didn't have the number one pick because I was statistically the worst team. I was, of course, the beneficiary of the lottery draft, and I thank all of you for implementing that. So I selected Jonathan Taylor with the number one pick. I was never considering Henry. Henry, in my mind, had already gotten hurt last season, so I'm not going to select somebody who just got hurt. I'm already avoiding Christian McCaffrey because he has a history of being hurt. I'd be an idiot to pick up McCaffrey and having the injury issues that I've had just with him and with others over the past 4 years. I'm asking I'm begging someone to just throw my pick away at that point. So I could not take the risk on Christian McCaffrey. I am not making a criticism of anyone who selects him in the very first round because I think he is still valuable and has enough upside to be selected for the very first round, but just not the very first pick. What I'm going to do now is recap the draft, and I want to highlight several things because it's not all about shitting on you guys. A few of you did some positive and smart moves. I did observe that as I was watching the draft, but for the most part, you had tragedies. You had a lot of stupid fucking picks, and I'd like to talk about those stupid fucking picks right now. We're not going to start with the dumbest. We're just going to ease into this, right? I want this to be a smooth transition. I want my cock to just smoothly swim inside your hole. Andy paid too much for Nick Chubb. I wanted Nick Chubb. In every mock draft that I did, Nick Chubb was the best available running back to me. I wanted Nick Chubb because he is the better of the Cleveland backfield, and the Cleveland backfield is one that's going to get a lot of work. They're going to see a lot of volume. So I wanted Nick Chubb for that reason. But when Andy selected him, again, I kind of feel like it's what Andy did about 2 years ago. He picked up Josh Jacobs. And I know I picked up Josh Jacobs, but you remember that my criticism was that you picked him. You picked him as your 10th and 11th pick, one of those, and Josh Jacobs, that's paying too much for him. I think he did the same thing here. Nick Chubb, though, being the better player, let's say that. Nick Chubb is the better player, but I think Andy should have selected someone else. I'm not going to take the time to point out who that person was, but I just remember at the time when Andy picked Nick Chubb, I just said, why? Why did he do that? Not that Nick Chubb isn't going to have any value, but Andy's just so whack how he makes his 10th and 11th selections. And of course, who could tell you about 10th and 11th selections than the man who has had the most 10th and 11th selections? Andy's team, for the most part, was just boring, so we're going to move along. Ed's selections were very interesting. Now, in 2016, Ed selections went like this: wide receiver, tight end, wide receiver, quarterback, Ryan Matthews. I'll say it again. Ed selected 2 wide receivers, a tight end, 2 wide receivers, a quarterback, and then decided to pick up Ryan Matthews, who, if I'm not mistaken, this was already when Ryan Matthews, I think he had like one decent season with the Packers, if I'm not mistaken, but there was no value to mark to Ryan Matthews at that time. That's when Ed decided for his 7th pick, he decided to select a running back. In 2017, Dro and Hensel also did the same thing that Ed did the year prior, which is not selecting a running back within your first 3 picks. They both went wide receiver. In 2020, Ed also picked wide receiver, wide receiver, wide receiver. And now, for the 2022 season, Ed is the only player that did not select a running back with his first 3 picks. He, of course, picked Breece Hall, who seems to be a promising young player for the Jets. I think that was a bit of a homer selection. I know that Ed is a Jets fan, so maybe he's picking him just for overall team morale, but I guess he's a sleeper if nothing else. I don't understand how we still do this within this league. It's been proven. If you do not select a mid-level, at the very least a mid-tier running back, then you almost have no chance to victory. Wide receivers are important. And yes, I'm aware of the tiny midget elephant in the room, which is Andy, who last year had Cooper Kupp and Samuels. But Andy selected Kupp with his 5th selection and Samuels with his 9th. He didn't go out of his way to pick up 3 receivers and no running backs. But that's Ed's decision. Ed can do what he wants. I'll also say that when I knew I was going to pick Jonathan Taylor, in my mind I was thinking, then Ed's gonna pick CMC. Ed's gonna pick CMC. And I will say that with the selection of Chase, I like that Ed did that because I wouldn't have picked CMC. Ed just had him last year. You have to be insane to do that. In particular, if you're Ed, if it's somebody else who didn't pick CMC last year with their number 1 pick, then yeah, maybe you can select him because he has so much upside. But I understand why he picked Chase. It is an Ed pick, by the way. Ed loves these kind of standalone wide receivers on trash teams who may get a ton of the volume. I would have never made that my very first selection if I had the first pick. I may have picked Chase if I had the 3rd or 4th pick. But let's move on to Orlando. Orlando's team, I felt like Orlando, he's taking a lot of chances. First of all, I'm sorry. Let's introduce Orlando to the recap center here. Spider-Man. I can't say Spider-Man. I can't pronounce it in the Japanese accent that you'd probably like me to. But let's just call him Damon. I don't know. I have no clue. We'll figure this one out. But let's just say Spider-Man for now. How about that? All right. He picks Dalvin Cook with his very first selection. I was a bit surprised by that, but Orlando normally goes for practical picks. I feel like he took a chance on Saquon Barkley. He went out of his way to select Saquon with his 2nd pick. And he's taking a chance on Michael Thomas, whose injury woes are, his track record is longer than Christian McCaffrey's. B-Hop, who is suspended the first 6 games of the season. This is why I picked up AJ Green, hoping that within that first month and a half of the season, AJ Green can maybe be fantasy relevant, and then I just toss him to the side when B-Hop comes back. But he's taking a risk on B-Hop because he's foregoing a stronger wide receiver for somebody that he thinks will yield benefit later in the season, and B-Hop isn't getting any younger. Melvin Gordon is another lingering fucking fantasy name that just won't go away. He's taking a chance on him. Kittle has a history of injuries as well. So Orlando's team, although he made some selections that, as I said, were practical. I wanted Russell Wilson. If I didn't have the chance to pick up Josh Allen with my 2nd round of picks, if I didn't have him there, I probably would have just waited and gotten Russell Wilson probably around the same time where he got him. I'm interested in Christian Kirk and what he does with the Jacksonville Jaguars, but then again, it's not really a high-powered offense. And, what more can you say? And your kicker's gay. How about that? Joe Horrible, terrible, horrible, no good fantasy selections by Joe. He starts off with Cooper Kupp. It's the it move to do now. Okay, you pick up Cooper Kupp. Let's see what Cooper Kupp does this season. Will he be the number one wide receiver? I don't think so. But, no, you know what? No. I'm not going to say that it's all relative and to pick anyone in the very first round is to hope that they land as the top 5 or they give you more of a chance to be number one. I believe if you pick somebody like a Cooper Kupp, who, okay, he was decent leading up until last year, but last year was just an explosion. Last year was his Brady Anderson season. If some of you remember when Brady Anderson, like towards the tail end of his season during the steroid era, he had that one year where he got 50 home runs. And we were too young at the time. I mean, what were we, like 12, 13? I'm not sure. I don't remember. But we were too young at the time to really question it. But it's like, holy shit, where the fuck did Brady Anderson just get all of this power from? You know, I'm not alluding to Cooper Kupp being on steroids, but it's the equivalent to that. I don't know. It's you know, he gets real puffy. You know, he gets, you know, he's like a blowfish. There we go. He went blowfish last year, but I don't believe that's who he is. But nonetheless, Joe selected him with his very first pick. And then after that, he went running back with Alvin Kamara. Good pick there. Then wide receiver, Clyde Edwards. I want to remind you that when I read the stats about the, you know, players leaving out the top 3, leaving running backs out of their top 3, none of those were championship teams. And we know this because that list consisted of Dro, Hensel, and Ed. None of these were fantasy championship seasons. And though one or two of them may have been playoff seasons, Joe had his strongest season last year. We understand that. He had a very strong run. I was rooting for Joe, and I'm still rooting for Joe if I lose. Obviously, I don't have to point out why. But to leave out running backs like Ed did, but even worse than Ed did, because you can at least give Ed the credit that Ed kind of just denied. After Ed picked up Breece Hall, then he picked up Metcalf, then he picked up Kyler Murray, and then he picked up a running back. So he really did run away from him, but not as much as Joe. Joe just consistently just went wide receiver. And then he picks up Amari Cooper. And Amari Cooper, to me, I wanted to stay away from him completely this year because I don't believe in him getting any volume. Deshaun Watson isn't even there. I don't want any parts of him. And then here's the other thing that Joe does, because Joe is always full of surprises. There was a moment during the fantasy draft where I couldn't stop laughing. I think it was Joe's first or second pick. Joe took almost all of he took like almost 58 seconds just to make his selection, and I couldn't stop laughing at Joe staring at his computer, just delaying the inevitable. Just how am I gonna mess this season up? Let me take my time with this one. He was very calculated with his mistake this time around, but he made mistakes nonetheless. What did Joe do? Take a look at Joe's roster. If you're in front of your computer, if you got the fantasy app up, just give it a second. Just pause it if you want to, you know, but just head over to your laptop and then just go to the fantasy recaps. There's a tab at the top that says by team, and you can see all of our selections. And Joe selected the Bills with his 10th pick. Then he came back and picked up the Packers with his 11th pick. And then he picks up Hunter Renfrow, who I had last year, the little Renfrow that could, with his 12th pick. And then he picks Matthew Stafford. So not only did he neglect running backs, but he took Ed a step further. He upped the ante and ignored quarterbacks. We get it that quarterbacks are deep, and there's several tiers within the quarterback rankings. But to select the Bills, Then the Packers. In my opinion, you're already picking a defense way too early if you're picking it with your 10th pick. My 10th pick, I locked down Dawson Knox, okay? I locked in not necessarily a Hydra, but on certain weeks, on certain nights, maybe tomorrow, Andy, I can sting you like a Hydra. So that's what I did with my 10th pick. And I wasn't the only one either. I mean, let's see other 10th picks here. Let's see. So 10th pick was when Orlando selected B-Hop. Okay? Andy picks up Rashard Penny, right? That's halfway decent, even though Rashard Penny hasn't really shown any benefit. Eric picks up Cordell Patterson. We'll get to Eric's picks later. Who else here? Then Hensel had a really good selection with his 10th pick with Chris Olave, who I wanted. So this is what everyone else was doing during their 10 picks. And Joe, who was very calculated with his errors this year, selected the Bills defense. When you select Matthew Stafford, you could have selected Matthew Stafford as your 10th. No, that's not what I want to say. What I really want to say is you could have gotten someone better and still have picked up the Bills and the Packers with your 12th and 13th pick. You could have gotten a better quarterback. Now, I get it. Joe wants to stack up Cooper Kupp with Matthew Stafford. Is there value to that? Sure, I think there's value to that. But in my opinion, I don't think that Matthew Stafford is... It's to Joe's benefit to stack him up with Cooper Kupp. I think he could have stacked him up with somebody stronger. Ed, for example, picked up Chase, but didn't feel the necessity to pick up Joe Burrow. So you don't necessarily have to do it. We understand what Joe did, but in our opinion, what the fuck was the point of picking those two defenses? What was the point of picking up those two defenses when I can almost guarantee you that in 3 or 4 weeks, neither of those defenses will be there. Maybe the Bills will be there, but you're gonna stream the defenses. Well, what are you doing, Joe? This is over 10 seasons now, and you're still making the same basic mistakes. Joe decided to ignore running backs and ignore quarterbacks, and now we move on to Eric, who paid entirely too much for Jalen Hurts. He selected Hurts with his 6th pick. Now, here's what I think about Eric. Last season, Eric had Patrick Mahomes. I think Eric wanted Patrick Mahomes. Now, he was selected 43rd by Hensel. That was Hensel's 5th pick. Then, with Eric's 48th pick, he picks up A.J. Dillon, which was a good pickup. A.J. Dillon and Aaron Jones are, they're comparable to a Chubb and Hunt situation. And then he picks Jalen Hurts with the 53rd pick. I believe he wanted Patrick Mahomes, so he kind of got flustered. He kind of panicked and went off course. Who, in their honest opinion, can speak? Think of everyone in this fantasy league, all right? Everyone, I want you to think about the 9 other guys. Think about every other guy here, how fucking ugly they are, and think, would they have been interested to pick up Jalen Hurts even in the 10th round? Even in the 10th round. I mean, if Joe picks up Matthew Stafford with his 13th pick, you mean to tell me Eric couldn't have selected Jalen Hurts with his 13th pick as well? I think he could have, because he came right back in the 12th round and picked up Dak Prescott. Dak Prescott easily more valued within this league because it's the Dallas Cowboys. Who gives a shit about the Philadelphia Eagles? I think he paid entirely too much for him. Of course, he picked up Najee Harris. That was a good selection. Mark Andrews, who in the back of my mind, I was thinking of stacking up Mark Andrews with Josh Allen, but that would have been completely irresponsible of me to just leave out 2 running backs with the first 3 picks. I refuse to just go running back and 2 other different positions. I just wouldn't have done that. A.J. Brown, that's a good selection. Brandon Cooks, who I wanted with the 7th pick as well. So Eric, other than that, everything is pretty bland as far as his team. He has a decent wide receiver core in, as I said, A.J. Brown, Cooks, who could possibly play the flex, and he has Tyler Lockett on his bench. Moving on to Hensel, who did one pivotal thing that surprised me, and it's the fact that along with selecting Ezekiel Elliott with his 3rd pick, he also picked up Tony Pollard. I wouldn't have expected Hensel to do that. I wouldn't have expected Hensel to back up, or in some cases, playing both Pollard and Elliott, because that's a possibility as well. I don't know if I could necessarily say that it'd be the timeshare of a Chubb and a Hunt, but at the very least, that's backing up his 3rd pick, though I don't really think that's what it is, because Ezekiel Elliott's not valuable enough to be backed up. I passed up on Ezekiel Elliott and picked David Montgomery instead. He also picked up Darnell Mooney, who I had my eyes on for the Chicago Bears. And as far as that, Hensel's, of course, makes the same mistakes as Joe and picks up 2 defenses. He picks up the Charger defense with his 12th pick, and he picks up the Buccaneers with his 13th pick. Now, that could have been a response to Joe's fucking rampage of fantasy selections, and you know how that happens. It kind of just ripples throughout the entire league once you select something, then I select something, and then we all go crazy. But I will say that Hensel did a good job by picking up those 2 players. Does that necessarily make Hensel a threat? No, it doesn't. It just means that Hensel might have had a more successful draft than he normally has. Also, Javonte Williams was his 2nd pick, and Melvin Gordon, of course, is just going to haunt him the whole season. So good luck with that one. Moving on to J. Ray, who should change his team name to Charles Lee Chargers, or Charge Lee J. Ray. He basically duplicated Paul's team from last year. Just all he did was switch around Keenan Allen with Mike Williams. J. Ray selected Austin Eckler with his very first selection, Aaron Jones with his 2nd selection. Great first 2 players, great foundation, very strong selections. Herbert with the 3rd. I believe had I not picked Josh Allen, he would have picked Josh. And though, no, because this seems very deliberate. This is like, Tower 2 being attacked. Like, I don't know. I think this was deliberate. I think he intentionally tried to duplicate Paul's team from last year, because you saw the success that the Chargers defense had, and it basically kept Paul afloat. Although we'll all be sitting around and waiting for doomsday, waiting for bad matchups, and waiting for injuries, so the whole thing falls apart. He also picked up Darren Walker with his 5th pick. Gabe Davis, who I wanted, but I wasn't willing to select Gabe Davis in the I wasn't willing to select Gabe Davis in the 5th round. I think I passed up on him, and then J. Ray picked him up in the 6th. It was somewhere around there. I looked at Gabe Davis and I said, I want you, but I'm not gonna take you just yet. And by the time he made it back around, I didn't see him. As far as the rest of J. Ray's team, he really doesn't have much of a bench. So the rest of his team is just kind of bland, like some of you. Nothing else to speak of here, but he's just holding on for the Chargers. That's all he's doing. I'd love to look back at Paul's team last year and see what else he had added to. Well, of course, he had Jonathan Taylor along with the Chargers, so don't forget that. Aaron Jones would have to produce something close to what Jonathan Stewart had produced last year, and the Chargers offense would still have to produce what it produces last year in order for you to duplicate what Paul did. Paul made it to the chip. I do not think that you are making it to the chip when you do not have the number 1 running back along with your 3-headed monster. No, I don't think so, Jay. Go fuck yourself. Now we're going to move on to Pedro, who had a decent fantasy draft as well, picking up Christian McCaffrey. Now, even though he picked up some good players, Pedro didn't do what you should do with CMC. I'm going to sound like a broken record. I'm just going to sound like the most boring ABC 1, 2, 3 tactician guy and say that he should have picked up Deontay Foreman to back up CMC. The likelihood of CMC missing at least 3 to 4 games, it's very possible. It's very possible for that to happen. And if it does, with my 15th selection, by the way, I selected him at 15th, okay? Pedro selected the Bengals defense at 15th and then picked up Gesicki. He already had Ertz, which he picked up in the 9th round. Now, I don't say that you shouldn't back up your tight ends, because tight ends are important in this league as well, especially if you're not going to go for a top. Absolutely, you should back up your tight ends. That's part of the reason why Pedro had a decent draft, is because he did things like that. If you're not going to pick up a top guy, you should back them up. I'm not backing up Dawson because I'm not taking Dawson out if he's not injured. Dawson is just connected to Josh Allen. I play the odds. I do not play the man. And I'll get to what I mean in just a second. So he picked up Claypool with one of his later selections, and I believe in Claypool. I do not think that just because Roethlisberger's gone, he's just going to fuck off into obscurity. I think he's going to have a better season than people expect him to have. Of course, he picked up Sutton with his 4th pick. I was very interested in Sutton. James Conner, who I believe Pedro had last year, is having a second go around at this NFL career. He's establishing himself as a very solid pick, and I don't know if he's going to duplicate what he did last year. Pedro selected him at 3rd. Maybe paid a little bit too much for him. Maybe paid a little bit too. But at the time, I'm sure his projection was far more than most other running backs because, being a part of the Arizona offense, you would think that he's got to rub off some of those points. Leonard Fournette with his 2nd pick, very practical, very, very basic pick. Pedro picks up 3 running backs. I hate to be boring, but that's pretty strong. I mean, the only strong thing that Pedro doesn't have is wide receivers. He does have Sutton, but he's got Waddle and he's got Deontay Johnson with the Pittsburgh Steelers as well. So I wouldn't say that he has the strongest running back core, and Aaron Rodgers as his quarterback. So decent selections by Pedro. Of course, he will fuck it all off in week 3 or 4 when he makes a unnecessary trade or just gets bored with the season. You know what happens with Pedro. So I believe that's about it, right? I ran through all of them. I talked about Rollo Thomas. Did I talk about Rollo Thomas? No, I didn't. See, I didn't get to you, Rollo. You know why, Rollo? Because you were just, you just did what you did. You were just there. You picked up Mixon with your first selection, then Stephon Diggs. I knew I wasn't gonna get a hold of him. Travis Kelce with the third pick, and then Paul does what Paul does. He picks up Mike Evans, and then he expects to win a championship. That's what Paul does every season. Paul selects Mike Evans and then just sits back and says, championship, here we come. Paul is, of course, the underachiever over the last 3 to 4 years. Somebody who's had a lot of season success, which obviously transferred into some playoff success, making it to the chip a few times, but not getting that second chip. We remember what happened a couple seasons ago, and just last year he lost to Andy. So Paul is in a position where if he doesn't win a championship, the season is a failure. It's a complete and utter failure. Do I believe that the team that I see before me right here is a team that's going to get Paul's team there? I hope it isn't. I really hope it's not. But Joe Burrow is his quarterback selection. He also picked up Terry McLaurin for the Washington Generals, and I can't believe I just said Generals, but Antonio Gibson Also, I wanted to stay from anyone in Washington. I just wanted to stay away from them. I wasn't interested in that team at all. And that's pretty much it. Is this going to get Paul to the playoffs? I don't know. But if Paul makes it to the playoffs and loses in round 2, who gives a shit? Paul should have had 2 victories already. He should have had 2 chips. He's the underachiever. I think that pretty much wraps up the fantasy draft. If I missed one of you, which I don't believe I missed any of you, forgive me. This obviously means that you are insignificant. You pose no threat to anyone in this league. Make your peace with it and go away. Let's get into the week 1 scores, and then Team Bundy will politely tell you to go fuck yourself. Team Bundy going up against Highlander Part 2. First of all, Andy, capitalize the lander. It looks better. And literally putting in Part 2 is fucking stupid, because in the movie poster, it just says Highlander number 2, right? So take the part out, idiot. I was gonna say part. Let's call you that. Highlander Part 2. Let's make you sound boring. Highlander Part 2 against Team Bundy. What can you say? There's nothing more to be said here than I am the number 1 team in fantasy right now, as projected by ESPN. Before we read the, let's go into that. I'm sorry. How could I miss that? How could I miss this jewel, which was sent to me by ESPN? After the draft, as most of you know, there are rankings where they assess it however the fuck they assess it. I don't know what the metrics are. I haven't looked into it. I don't even think that's available. But Team Bundy is the very first team. At number 2 is Platanos, Ewok Rape 3rd, La Bamba 4th, Harlem Heat. That's something that I forgot to mention. Ed changed his name from Show Me Your TDs to Harlem Heat. At first, I thought Ed was gonna do like something satanic. He posted up that weird video in the fantasy chat, and I thought he was gonna he was gonna go like WWE heel or something like that. But Harlem Heat has returned, and he will do nothing like he always does. Rolo Thomas C, Highlander, Joelicus Maximus, Spider-Man, and Charles Lee J. Ray positioned at number 10. So technically, I am the number 1 team in the league. So, let's get that clear. And the point about playing the odds and not playing the man, Andy, I don't know whether you do this because you're superstitious. I don't know if you do this because you think I'm going to counter whatever it is that you do, or maybe you literally look at all fantasy matchups as what's that feature on the site here where you literally look at who's across the position, quarterback versus quarterback, running back 1 versus running back 1. Maybe you place a grid on the scoreboard and that's how you assess what you need to do, but I play the odds. I do not play the player. So no one gives a shit that you put all of your team on the bench. In fact, it's appropriate that you put all of your team on the bench, because that's where they belong, on the bench, because no one wants them. Enough, Andy. Give up the fucking belt. Rolo Thomas C going up against Platanos. Rolo Thomas C projected to get 90. Platanos projected to get 93. Spider-Man versus Ewok Rape. 93-89 in favor of Spider-Man. And of course, we have Joelicus Maximus coming back from his most improved player awarded season up against La Bamba to kick it off. La Bamba with a 10-point edge, 95-85. And finally, Harlem Heat against Charles Lee Chargers as the last matchup of week 1. Not here to make predictions. Not here to make predictions. I'm not here to declare anything, but I am here to say that, Andy, what is more than likely to happen is that you will begin the season 0-1. And when you begin the season 0-1, just remember that we face each other 2 times this season. This will not be the last time that I will dig in your ass. So, as always, may your quarterbacks get hurt before they leave the locker room. May your running backs pull their hamstrings. And may your wide receivers... Oh, I'm sorry. Right before I go, one of the dumbest selections of all was Ed picking up Odell Beckham Jr. with his very last pick, or his second to last pick. What an Ed pick. Didn't Ed do this a couple years ago when he picked up Ocho Cinco, and he just did it just because he did it, and it wasn't really to get any benefit from it? You guys are making the same mistakes you made 3-4 years ago. And as far as I remember, 3-4 years ago, you didn't win shit. May your wide receivers get arrested for marijuana possession. Go fuck yourselves.